This unit begins to study the subjunctive. We'll answer first what the subjunctive is, and then I'll show you how to form the subjunctive. When I say subjunctive, what do I mean by that? In Spanish, there are 4 modes, or modos. We have the indicative mode, the conditional mode, the imperative mode, and finally the subjunctive. When we're talking about the indicative, we're talking about facts. Pretty much everything you've learned in verb tenses so far has been verbs in the indicative mode. I speak Spanish, I spoke Spanish, I eat, I walked, I studied. These are all facts. And when you're talking about facts, you're going to use the indicative mode, which is pretty much what you've used mostly all along. We have also the conditional mode, which you're familiar with. That's when we say would. That's a set of endings that are ias, like hablaría, I would speak. That's not really a tense, it's a mode. When we say tense, what we mean by that is past, present, or future. Those are the 3 tenses that we have. So far we have the indicative mode, the conditional mode. We have the imperative, which is giving commands. Again, that's not really a tense like yesterday, today, and tomorrow. That's a way of speaking. It's a mode of speaking. So we have the indicative, which communicates facts, the conditional that communicates you would do something, the imperative, which communicates a command, and we have the subjunctive. So what does the subjunctive communicate when you are using it? You're communicating either doubt or desire, emotions or opinions, or a negative belief. In Spanish, a fact is an hecho. Would is just would. A command is mandato in Spanish. Doubt and desire are duda and deseo. Emotion and opinion in Spanish is emoción y opinión. And negative belief es una creencia negativa. So when you're communicating these things in Spanish, you're going to use different modes to communicate those things. Let's delve further into what this means. There are going to be 5 main categories of verbs that communicate doubt and desire and emotion, etc. Let's look at those 5 categories. We have verbs of cabeza, which are verbs of the head, verbos de certeza, which are verbs of certainty, verbs of opinion, emotion, and lastly, verbs of desire. There are other categories which we'll look at later on, but these are the 5 main categories of verbs you need to know about because they require the use of the subjunctive. Let's give you an example sentence of each so that you can begin to get your head around what we're talking about here. No creo que hables español is an example of a sentence that uses a verb of cabeza. Now, in these sentences with subjunctive, you're going to notice that there are 2 verbs. There's a first verb, and there's a second verb. It's the second verb that may or may not be in the subjunctive. It's the first verb that's going to be either one of these categories. So one of the verbs of cabeza is I don't believe. And other examples will be like I don't think or it doesn't seem to me. Those kind of verbs are going to fall into the category of verbs of cabeza. And notice in the sentence is a negative belief. I don't believe. So because it's negative in this first one, the second verb is also going to communicate that by going into the subjunctive. And this opposite ending here, hables, is an example of this verb hablar being used in the subjunctive. And we're going to show you how to form the subjunctive in a few minutes. And we're going to spend the next 5 units focusing on each one of these categories. Let's look and see what happens if this belief is not negative, but rather it's positive. I believe that you speak Spanish. Now it's not a negative belief, it's a positive belief. So the second verb would be in the indicative mode, the mode that talks about a fact. So you're going to be in the normal mode that you've learned right along, which is hablas. Creo que hablas versus no creo que hables. Notice when that first verb is a negative belief, the ending on that second verb switches to the opposite ending, which means that's in the subjunctive. You may not fully appreciate what that means right now, but just kind of continue to hear out what I have to say for this lesson. Let's look at an example of a verb that's a verb of certeza. No es cierto que comas mucho. Notice again, we have a negative belief. No es cierto. It is not certain. And because it's not certain, the verb comer is going to have the opposite ending. If you were to say it is certain, then this would have a regular ending in the indicative. Another category of verbs that are going to use the subjunctive are verbs of opinion. So when you're sharing your opinion, for example, it's good, it's bad, it's possible, it's impossible. These kind of opinions will be followed by a verb that will use the opposite ending, which is going to be a verb in the subjunctive, like vivas. If you're communicating emotion, there's a bunch of verbs that communicate emotion, and for the most part, they're the me gusta phrases. I like that you arrive on time. I like that you arrive. And notice when you're sharing your emotions, you can say me gusta, me encanta, me frustra. Whenever you're using those me gusta phrases, you're communicating an emotion. And when you're communicating emotions in Spanish, the second verb in that sentence is going to have to flip the ending. In this case, it's not llegas, you arrive, it's llegues a tiempo. I like that you arrive on time. Me gusta que llegues. You're communicating your emotion, so you have to flip that ending. The last of these 5 categories is desire. If you're communicating any kind of desire, for example, I want you to put on the shirt. Quiero, I want, I demand, I require, I need. When you're talking about desire, that second verb has to flip into the subjunctive. It wouldn't be te pones, it's te pongas, because you're communicating a desire. So we have creer is a verb of cabeza. Es cierto is a verb of certeza. Es bueno is a verb of opinion. Me gusta is a verb of emotion. And quiero is a verb of desire. In these sentences, there's always going to be a connector. So notice there's que as a connector between verb 1 and verb 2. Verb 1 and verb 2, they're going to have a connector that is between those two verbs. So this first verb is what's going to be one of these 5 categories. It's the second verb after the connector that may or may not be subjunctive. And that's what we're going to spend more time learning about in this unit.